Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, October 28th, 2022. A man breaks into the San Francisco home of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, apparently searching for the speaker, who was not there, and brutally attacks the speaker's 82-year-old husband, Paul, with a hammer. San Francisco police say the suspect is in custody and will be facing charges. President Biden and bipartisan leadership of Congress with statements of prayers and concern for Paul Pelosi, and outrage that the attack took place. Week and a half until the midterm elections, former President Barack Obama campaigning in Georgia for Democratic candidates for U.S. Senator and Governor, while Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas also speaking at a rally for the Republican Senate nominee in Georgia. Which party might have the edge to gain majorities in the Senate and House after Election Day? We'll talk with Cook Political Report analyst David Wasserman. Former President Donald Trump says he does not plan to go back on Twitter if the new owner, Elon Musk, lifts his lifetime ban. But Donald Trump also saying he does not think Twitter can be successful without him. We'll talk with a technology reporter at Politico, Rebecca Kern, about what Twitter under Elon Musk means for politicians who use the platform and the long-time debate over content moderation. And the Pentagon announcing more military aid for Ukraine as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tells students and faculty at Yale University how long he thinks the war against invading Russia will last. Associated Press Dateline San Francisco, an intruder attacked and severely beat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer in the couple's San Francisco home early Friday while searching for the Democratic leader and chillingly shouting, "Where is Nancy? Where is Nancy?" This all began with a statement earlier from a spokesman for Speaker Pelosi, Drew Hamill, who wrote early this morning an assailant broke into the Pelosi residence in San Francisco and violently assaulted Mr. Pelosi. The assailant is in custody and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Mr. Pelosi was taken to the hospital where he is receiving excellent medical care and expected to make a full recovery. The Speaker was not in San Francisco at the time. The Speaker and her family are grateful to the first responders and medical professionals involved and request privacy at that time. That was the statement from the spokesperson for Speaker Pelosi. Then the U.S. Capitol Police putting out a statement saying it is assisting the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the San Francisco Police with a joint investigation into the break-in. Then statements of support coming, including this from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. The president is praying for Paul Pelosi and for Speaker Pelosi's whole family. This morning, he called Speaker Pelosi to express his support after this horrible attack. He's also very glad that a full recovery is expected. The president continues to condemn all violence and asks that the family's desire for privacy be respected. And then mid-afternoon, an update from San Francisco law enforcement.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chief Bill Scott with the San Francisco Police Department. At approximately 2:27 this morning, San Francisco police officers were dispatched to the residence of Speaker Nancy Pelosi regarding an A-priority well-being check. When the officers arrived on scene, they encountered an adult male and Mr. Pelosi's husband, Paul. Our officers observed Mr. Pelosi and the suspect both holding a hammer. The suspect pulled the hammer away from Mr. Pelosi and violently assaulted him with it. Our officers immediately tackled the suspect, disarmed him, took him into custody, requested emergency backup, and rendered medical aid. The suspect has been identified as 42-year-old David DePepe. Mr. Pelosi and Mr. DePepe were transported to a local hospital for treatment. This is an active investigation currently being led by the San Francisco Police Department Special Investigations Division. We are working closely with our partners from the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Capitol Police, and our district attorney here in San Francisco County, D.A. Brooke Jenkins, and her team. The motive for this attack is still being determined. Mr. DePepe will be booked at the San Francisco County Jail on the following charges: attempted homicide, assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, burglary, and several other additional felonies. Before I go any further, I'd like to thank the responding officers for their swift action this morning. Those San Francisco police officers are Officer Colby Wilmus, Officer Kyle Cagney, and Sergeant Edmund Hoang. I'd also like to thank our emergency dispatcher, Heather Grimes, who's standing here to my left, for a really amazing job. For inquiries regarding Mr. Pelosi and his condition, we refer you to the statement issued by Speaker Pelosi's office this morning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our District Attorney, Brooke Jenkins, for a few brief comments. And let me say in advance, this is what we know at this time. We will update you further, but we will not be able to take any questions after this statement.
Thank you, Chief Scott, and I do want to commend the San Francisco Police Department for their immediate response to this home and for swiftly making sure that Mr. Pelosi was okay and that the suspect was apprehended. We are working closely with them right now with respect to the investigation and will proceed with the appropriate charges as things unfold, as well as work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and our federal partners. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I know you may have, we'll update you when we get more.
Do you know how he got into the house?
That's it for right now. We're not going to take any questions. Thank you. Our office will be issuing a news release very soon, but that's it for now. Thank you.
In San Francisco, the statements from Bill Scott, the San Francisco Police Chief, and Brooke Jenkins, San Francisco District Attorney. Associated Press notes that the intruder's shouts in Speaker Pelosi's California home, the reports of "Where's Nancy," were an unsettling echo of the chants during the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the Capitol. Rioters trying to stop Joe Biden's election searched menacingly through the halls for the Speaker. CNN's law enforcement correspondent Whitney Wild tweeting that the San Francisco Police Department identifying the alleged attacker as 42-year-old David DePapi, and that CNN reached two of the man's relatives who told CNN he's estranged from his family, and that a review of his Facebook page shows he posted memes and conspiracy theories about COVID, the 2020 election, and the January 6th attack. The U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that he spoke with Speaker Pelosi today to convey his deepest concern and heartfelt wishes to her husband and their family, and he called the attack dastardly. And the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, tweeting, horrified and disgusted by the reports that Paul Pelosi was assaulted in his and Speaker Pelosi's home last night. Grateful to hear that Paul is on track to make a full recovery and that law enforcement, including our stellar Capitol Police, are on the case. And NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles tweeting that a spokesperson for the House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, tells NBC that he reached out to Speaker Pelosi about the attack on her husband, and that Leader McCarthy reached out to the Speaker to check in on Paul and said he's praying for a full recovery and is thankful they caught the assailant. This is Washington Today. Now to election campaigns. In Georgia, former President Barack Obama headlining rallies in College Park in Atlanta for Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock running for re-election. Also, Democratic nominee for governor Stacey Abrams. NBC News writing that Barack Obama hopes to use his star power within the party, mainly with young and black voters, core Democratic constituencies that can be fickle in midterm elections, to motivate turnout. Ahead of the in-person campaigning, former president recording an ad for Senator Warnock.
Georgia, serious times call for special leaders. Leaders you can trust. Leaders who are driven by something bigger than politics. That's why you need to re-elect my friend and your senator, Reverend Raphael Warnock. I've known Reverend Warnock for years. He's a man of great moral integrity, a leader in the truest sense of the word. In just 2 years in office, he's worked to lower healthcare costs for seniors and bring good jobs to Georgia. And he's been a clear voice in the fight to defend our democracy and protect the right to vote. There aren't a lot of people in Washington like Reverend Warnock. And that's exactly why we need to send him back. This is going to be a close race, so make sure you vote early or on November 8th. Please join me in supporting Raphael Warnock for Senate.
I'm Raphael Warnock, and I approve this message.
An ad with former President Barack Obama as he starts his campaigning in key battleground states, starting with Georgia today on behalf of Senator Warnock and Stacey Abrams running for governor. Barack Obama also campaigning over the next week and a half in more states that are close, have close races: Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. When it comes to the Georgia Senate race, Democratic incumbent Warnock and the Republican nominee Herschel Walker are, according to most polls, virtually tied. Herschel Walker also getting some nationally known Republican help in his campaign in the final days. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, a former presidential candidate himself, was at a Herschel Walker rally on Thursday in Monroe, Georgia.
I'm here supporting my friend and someone who is going to be an extraordinary senator for the state of Georgia, the great Herschel Walker. Look, Herschel Walker is going to win. And Raphael Warnock is going to be evicted. And let me tell you how you know that Herschel's going to win. Well, that helps. Because the other side is losing their minds. They are attacking him with everything they got, and the more scared they get, the more it is they know he's going to win. And I'll tell you why he's going to win, because Warnock's views are wildly out of step with the values of the people of Georgia. The people of Georgia deserve a senator that will stand up and fight for small businesses and fight for jobs. The people of Georgia deserve a senator who will say to the out-of-control spending driving inflation through the roof, no, 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 stop the spending. The people of Georgia deserve a senator who understands common sense principles like we're going to support law enforcement, support our military, and secure the damn border. And I got to say, you think about Herschel and the career he's had in football, facing large linebackers looking to do real harm. I got to tell you, compared to that, Chuck Schumer ain't that scary. No.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, in Monroe, Georgia, alongside Herschel Walker, the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate from Georgia. Now to the Alaska Senate race. This reporting from the New York Times. Senator Lisa Murkowski, a moderate Republican fighting for re-election in Alaska, defended her record against attacks from her Trump-backed challenger, former President Donald Trump-backed, Kelly Tshibaka, in a debate on Thursday. Ms. Murkowski advanced to the general election in November with a nearly 7-point lead over Ms. Tshibaka, and both outperformed their Democratic opponent, Patricia Chesbrough. But the senator has had to relentlessly campaign for political survival since she voted to convict Donald J. Trump in his impeachment trial after the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. Ms. Murkowski has continued to be a target of Mr. Trump, who visited the state in July for a rally for Ms. Tshibaka, and this week criticized Ms. Murkowski during a tele-rally as one of the worst senators even imaginable. That from the New York Times. Here's a bit of Thursday night's Alaska Senate debate in Anchorage. Kelly Tshibaka asking Lisa Murkowski a question.
When you launched your campaign, you said, in this election, lower 48 outsiders are going to try to grab Alaska's Senate seat for their partisan agendas. Frankly, they couldn't care less about your future. A year later, lower 48 and Washington, D.C. dark money have spent more on your behalf than both of our campaigns have spent combined. Why are you now beholden to lower 48 and D.C. dark money that doesn't care about our Alaska future?
Senator, 1 minute for your response.
So this couldn't be further from the truth in terms of being beholden to anybody on the outside. I think Alaskans who know me, who have watched me, who see me serve, know full well that my prime driver every day on every issue is all about Alaska. We recognize that there are outside groups that are weighing in. They're weighing in on my campaign, they're weighing in on your campaign, they're weighing in on a host of different campaigns. And in many ways, they've kind of subsumed everything else that's out there. But as a candidate, we know we can't control that. In fact, just today, you stated that you can't control outside money or what others say about me, were your words. And I think we know that. It might be frustrating, but that's the reality of what happens with these independent expenditure campaigns. There can be no coordination. But let there be no doubt, there is no Lisa Murkowski being beholden to any outside interests.
Ms. Chewbacca, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal, please.
I think we all know how Washington, D.C. works, and I think that's what you were trying to tee up in your launch video, that when they come in and they help you keep your Senate seat, you owe them favors. But when I talk to Alaskans, we just don't want a senator who's bought and bullied by the D.C. establishment. We want someone who represents our Alaska independent voices. When I go to doors across Alaska, we don't want a politician where their quality of life goes up. We want a public servant. We don't understand why our cost of living goes up while the D.C. insiders get a better life.
Kelly Chewbacca and Senator Lisa Murkowski, both Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate, debating Thursday night in Anchorage. There was a third candidate on the stage, a Democrat, Patricia Chesbro, and there's a fourth candidate in the race that will be on the ballot, Republican Buzz Kelly. He did not debate last night because he has suspended his campaign and endorsed Kelly Chewbacca. And the reason for multiple candidates from the same party in this general election in Alaska is because the state is using ranked choice voting to declare a winner. For more on whether Republicans or Democrats will likely have a majority in the U.S. Senate after the November 8th elections, C-SPAN spoke with David Wasserman from the Cook Political Report.
You know, a month ago, we would have said Democrats had a narrow edge in the battle for the Senate, but this is awfully tight. It's rare that we go into Election Day with this much uncertainty about the chamber, and it's really, on a razor's edge in 4 states. There are 3 Republican-held states that I would consider competitive, and those are Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. There are 3 Democratic-held states that I'd consider very competitive: Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. We've seen, I think, Wisconsin and North Carolina move in Republicans' favor. I think the other 4 races, though, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, are super, super tight. And Republicans need to win 2 of those 4 races to win the majority. The biggest change has been in Pennsylvania. And last month it looked like John Fetterman had a substantial lead, maybe 7 or 8 points over Mehmet Oz, because Oz had catastrophic negative ratings, unfavorability for a major party nominee in a swing state. He had carpetbagged from New Jersey to run. But Dr. Oz has been successful in making this race more of a referendum on John Fetterman, not just his health and the lingering effects of his stroke, but also his record on crime. And this is what Democrats are fearful of, not just in Pennsylvania, but in Wisconsin, in a whole host of House races where they're on defense on this issue. And John Fetterman was atop the board of pardons in Pennsylvania. He pushed for more lenient sentencing or clemency for nonviolent offenders. He pushed for more discretionary sentencing in murder cases. He stopped short of calling to end cash bail like some other progressive Democrats have. But that's been enough for Oz to try and portray him as soft on crime. And that has evened up the race.
And then in Arizona, your colleague Jessica Taylor yesterday taking it from Democratic leaning back to toss-up.
Well, that's right. And part of what we're seeing in Arizona is that the Republican Kari Lake is doing quite well in the governor's race, and they're campaigning together, Lake and Blake. Blake Masters, the Republican Senate nominee, against Democrat Mark Kelly. And so even though Kelly has had a massive spending advantage in this race, Arizona is a perpetually close state. We saw a razor-thin margin for Joe Biden there in 2020. We're going to see a very tight outcome again this year, and it could take weeks before we really know the answer.
David Wasserman is an editor with the Cook Political Report, joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, writes CNN, will be making a rare joint appearance on the campaign trail in Philadelphia Friday evening as they seek to boost Pennsylvania Democrats in the closing stretch of the election, including John Fetterman in that Senate race. David Wasserman also talking to C-SPAN about the U.S. House races. He says the prediction there is clear. Republicans will probably take over the majority from the Democrats post-election.
Republicans have the momentum in the battle for the House, no doubt about that. But this is a weird year because we're looking at a split screen between purple and red states and then blue states. It's actually Democrats who are holding up well relatively, and they're polling in red and purple states because they've been able to make the election a little bit more about the abortion issue in states where there have been threats to abortion access, whereas in blue states, Democrats are double incumbents. Not only is Joe Biden unpopular nationally, his approval rating is still between 42 and 43%, but they also control state government there. And there are fewer threats to abortion access. Roe v. Wade is certain to remain the law in those states. And so Democrats are really struggling relative to 2020 in a lot of seats Biden carried comfortably in places like New York and California and Oregon and even Connecticut and Rhode Island. Some of the party's best known names in the House. The chairman of the DCCC, Sean Patrick Maloney, we just moved him from lean Democrat to toss up on Monday. Katie Porter in California, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. These are big Democratic names in the House who are not out of the woods. They are at genuine risk. Our overall outlook in the House is a Republican gain of between 12 and 25 seats. And with 33 toss-ups on our chart, there are a lot of possible ways this could go.
Give us the state of play right now in the House. I mean, what is their majority right now? It's thin. It
is. And part of the reason why we're not looking at a huge, massive, 63-seat gain like Republicans had in 2010 or a 54-seat gain like they had in 1994, they're starting out from a higher floor in the House. Currently, they're at 213 seats to Democrats at 222. That means that a sneeze could tip over the House. They only need 5 seats to regain control. And there are 3 structural advantages that Republicans have in the House that they don't have in the Senate. The first is redistricting. Keep in mind, this is the first election cycle since the 2020 census, so every state has had to redraw its boundaries, except for the 6 states that only have 1 district and are spared the madness of this process. But Republicans were able to gerrymander more states than Democrats because a lot of big blue states like California, New Jersey, Virginia, Colorado, Washington, they passed anti-gerrymandering reform. And so they have independent or bipartisan commissions that drew their boundaries in fairly neutral ways, or maybe only slightly Democratic-leaning maps, whereas Republicans were able to manipulate the boundaries in their favor in Texas and Georgia and Ohio and Tennessee, and especially Florida, where Governor DeSantis rammed through a map that gives Republicans an extra 4 seats. Second structural advantage for Republicans, open seats and retirements. We are seeing far more Democrats leave the House this year than Republicans, and so there are 32 open Democratic seats to 24 open Republican seats. But it's not just the difference in quantity, it's also the types of districts Democrats are leaving behind. They're leaving behind a lot of swing seats. We see 19 Democratic open seats as vulnerable to Republican takeover compared to 6 open Republican seats that are vulnerable. So that's another pathway for Republicans to get 5 seats. And then the third advantage they have is recruitment. That's the third R. And Republicans, unlike in the Senate, where they've bickered and argued among their leadership over the types of candidates they've nominated, and Trump has played more of a role, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, has had a much more disciplined candidate recruitment operation. And 70% of the Republican nominees in the most vulnerable Democratic seats are women, minorities, and or veterans. 38% are women, 34% are military veterans, and 23% are not white. And so that makes it harder for Democrats to cast these Republican challengers as the second coming of Trump when they don't look or sound like him.
David Wasserman is with the Cook Political Report U.S. House Senior Editor, joining C-SPAN on the Washington Journal program this morning. You can find the full discussion with him, runs almost an hour, includes calls from listeners and viewers at our video library, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow up 828, Nasdaq up 309, S&P up 93. An article at Politico.com on Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter includes this: the takeover could have huge implications for the future of Washington's favorite social media app, especially if former President Donald Trump is allowed back on the platform, and if Elon Musk loosens the rules to prevent the spread of hate speech and misinformation. The reporter on that story, Rebecca Kern, covers technology policy for Politico, joining us now by phone. Thank you so much. So, former President Trump has said that he is not going to go back on the platform. So where do we stand with this?
Yeah, lots of back and forth happening in the last kind of 12 hours. But Donald Trump has created his own social media app called Truth Social. And he did an interview with Fox today saying he wants to stay on the platform. He likes Musk and he's, a fan of him, but he thinks he has more traction on Truth. And so that's what he says. Elon Musk has said he would lift any permanent bans of individuals he does not believe that permanent bans should exist on the platform. So that therefore could mean that Musk could be allowing Trump to join at some point. But right now, it sounds like Trump may be playing a little hard to get.
These rules to prevent the spread of hate speech and misinformation that you mentioned, how has that impacted how Congress has interacted with Twitter?
Yeah, it's a good question. Over the years, Congress has brought in the former CEO of Twitter, who was a co-founder, Jack Dorsey, and they've kind of grilled him on how the platform handles a lot of unsavory content like extremist and terrorist content to hate speech to election-related misinformation. And over the years, we've watched as Congress has continued to put pressure on the platform that the platform, as a result, has developed more stringent rules, particularly around election misinformation following the 2020 elections. And as we head into the midterms in less than 2 weeks, that those policies will continue to be put to a test. But that has been a source of frustration with Congress for some time now. We don't know if anyone wants to bring in the newest leader, which would be Elon Musk, because he totally could change the direction of the platform because he's called himself a free speech absolutist and says he wants a lot more content on the platform and less rules. So, and a lot of these rules were often created because of the public pressure and that from Congress that these platforms had too much misinformation and unsavory content on them. So that could end up reversing a lot of the efforts Twitter had put in place.
And the efforts in Congress to pass some legislation, some reform legislation, how far did that get? And now that Twitter is going private, where might that go in the future?
Yeah, so we had some efforts in place to reform the ultimate law that protects a lot of these companies online called Section 230. And it is this liability shield that would prevent them from being sued for content on the platform in most cases. There's been a lot of efforts to reform it, but very little bipartisan agreement. Generally, the lines fall along partisan divisions wherein Republicans say they want to reform the law to make it so more content stays up. They claim conservative viewpoints are being, quote unquote, censored, because the platform does take down a lot of viewpoints that are pushing racial slurs, hate speech, misinformation, and often that aligns with that political party. Whereas Democrats are on the viewpoint more content needs to be removed. A lot of hate speech and some misinformation still remain on the platform, and they think that more needs to be done. So while bills have been introduced, they're often partisan along those talking points. There's been some minor legislation that's not, unfortunately, advanced that would lead to more transparency reporting is where it seems there's some agreement that we don't know exactly the denominator of how much content these platforms end up taking down. They're not required to share that publicly, and they would like to know what content's removed and the reasoning. And so that's some legislation that has been introduced. It's just not passed to date.
We're talking with Rebecca Kern, a reporter with Politico. You talk about how Twitter is currently Washington, D.C.'s favorite social media app. Could there be changes made to the platform itself where that becomes, less popular? Not necessarily dealing with content, but maybe some other changes.
Well, I think a lot of it does stem from how Musk decides to handle the content moderation rules in place. And as I've alluded to, like earlier this year when he announced the buyout, he did it under the premise that he wanted more free speech, more content on the platform. Over time, it seems he's walked back some of those comments earlier. And even as of earlier this week, he put out a tweet directed specifically to advertisers, because I think a lot of advertisers on the platform were getting nervous that a lot of unsavory content was going to be allowed back on, and they don't want their ads next to that. And currently it is a public platform that does get ad revenue. So he put out a post saying, I do not want the platform to be a quote unquote free-for-all hellscape. So he acknowledged he wants some policies in place to protect a lot of, not good content. He wants the platform to be quote unquote warm and welcoming to all. So we'll see if he were to lift rules around hate speech content moderation policy, there could be a platform that's not welcoming to all. So we just really don't know. He's gone kind of back and forth with what he's been saying. And also just another update on Friday afternoon, he put out a new tweet saying he's going to form a content moderation council with widely diverse viewpoints. And that's where he's going to start his process of deciding what content moderation rules he wants to allow. So that's something we'll be watching.
Rebecca Kern, technology policy reporter with Politico. Find her work at politico.com. And on Twitter, she's at Rebecca M. Kern. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, tweeting today, free speech, liberal tears. And Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, with this tweet, if it angers you that free speech is winning and censorship is losing, buckle up. A lot of suppressed truths on social media and in Congress will be coming to light in the next 2 years. And CNBC reports that General Motors is suspending its advertising on Twitter as it evaluates Twitter's new direction under Elon Musk. They do note that the Detroit automaker General Motors is a rival to Musk's Tesla Motor Company. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Now to the war in Ukraine. This from NBC News. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Friday said that the partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists to fight in Ukraine that Russia announced in September was complete. Speaking at a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin broadcast on state television, he said that of the 300,000 mobilized recruits, 218,000 remained in training, while 82,000 had deployed to the conflict zone, of which 41,000 had been assigned to their units. He said that in the future, recruitment for the Ukraine campaign would be based on volunteers and professional soldiers rather than mobilizing more of Russia's several million reservists. President Putin declared a partial mobilization of the 300,000 reservists on September 21st after a series of military defeats saw Russia forces routed from East Ukraine's Kharkiv region and under increasing pressure in the southern Kherson region. That from NBC News. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today taking part virtually in a forum on the war. It was hosted by Yale University's School of Management. Before taking questions from the students, one invited journalist from CNBC, senior White House correspondent Kayla Tausche, asked how long the war might last.
I'll start with an impassioned plea that you made to the leaders of the G7 countries back in June to end the war by the winter. The winter is now approaching, and as the war goes on, everyone from progressive Democrats here in the U.S. to public figures like Elon Musk have made their own suggestions about how the war should end. At this point, will the war end with a battle or a negotiation, and when?
Thank you.
Дуже дякую вам за це відео.
Thank you for
for your video as well, and for this really helps to communicate with the public. Unfortunately, however tragic it might look, it cannot describe 100% what has been happening here. The reality is much harder, much horrible, and the reality is much horrible in many respects. So coming back to how to end the war, it's a complex thing because it depends on multiple factors. We've shown our resilience as the people. We continue. We are motivated by being the Ukrainians, by being the citizens of this country, from different walks of life, from different nationalities, but we are motivated with what we have, and we defend what we have. This is what depends on us. This is our end target, and we are going there. It is also very much dependent on our partners. I've spoke thanking the leaders of your country, the own party, the opposition. I'd like to take the chance to also thank your colleagues, the journalists, those who have been communicating the stories and making sure that the public, the society, does not forget about the war. This really translates into support which needs to be. It is also depending on the public in the Russian Federation, and for this, a powerful sanction-based pressure should be exerted on Russia. For them in Russia also to understand that they also are responsible for the political choice of the political leaders who decided to bring terror to the land of my country. So many factors are at play, and this all is united in just one principle, the principle of willingness. Willingness, when we all will be willing to end the war, it will end, and it will end soon, probably. It all depends on how willing we are, on our inner motivation. Now, all of us are the Ukrainians, because it is the Ukrainians who are fighting for the values in Europe, in the US, in Asia, in Africa, everywhere. In every country that deems itself a civilized country, a civilized society, a civilized democracy. So this depends on our joint will.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, through an interpreter, taking part virtually in a forum on the war hosted by Yale University's School of Management. The audio provided by the school. Also there in person, 2 U.S. Senators, Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. Those two have co-sponsored several bills this year in support of Ukraine and in sanctioning Russia for its invasion. At the Pentagon today, an announcement of another round of U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Here's the Deputy Press Secretary, Sabrina Singh.
Today, the department is announcing the authorization of the 24th presidential drawdown of security assistance valued at up to $275 million to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. This authorization is again our 24th drawdown of equipment from DoD inventories for Ukraine since August 2021. Capabilities in this package, which you'll see up here, additional ammunition for HIMARS, which are the high mobility artillery rocket systems, 500 precision-guided 155 artillery rounds, 2,000 155 millimeter rounds of remote anti-armor mine systems, more than 1,300 anti-armor systems, 125 Humvees, small arms, and more than 2.75 million rounds of small arms ammunition, and 4 satellite communications antennas. In total, the U.S. has committed more than $18.5 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Biden administration.
The Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh in the Pentagon briefing room today. BBC News reporting that Russian officials say they've completed an operation to move civilians out of the occupied southern city of Kherson ahead of an expected battle with advancing Ukrainian forces. At least 70,000 civilians are said to have crossed to the eastern bank of the Dnipro River in what Ukraine has called forced deportations. This week, we saw and heard Russian President Vladimir Putin again talking about nuclear weapons and claiming now that he never intended to use them in the war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden saying in a News Nation interview from Thursday night that he's skeptical and wary.
I want to ask you about the conflict in Russia or in Ukraine. Today, President Putin of Russia said that he has no intent to use chemical or nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Do you believe him?
I think if he has no intention, why does he keep talking about it? Why does he talk about the ability to use a tactical nuclear weapon? He's been very dangerous in how he's approached this, and he should just get out. He can end this all. Get out of Ukraine.
President Biden interviewed by News Nation on Thursday night, and that clip tweeted by that news organization. Today, retired General Philip Breedlove, a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, was asked his opinion on President Putin's intentions when it comes to nuclear weapons. General Breedlove was on a panel at the Atlantic Council.
General Breedlove, could you please assess the likelihood that Vladimir Putin is going to use nukes? Where are you on this question? And if you were on CNN and they're asking you to give a probability, is it 5% or is it 20%? What number would you give? And you're muted, sir.
So it's a great question, and frankly, my opinion has been shifting as we have getting closer and closer to what is now looks like an impending loss in the South. After a strategic loss north of Kyiv, after a strategic loss north and east of Kharkiv, now we see operational and tactical losses in the South that could roll up into something bigger. I think that the probability has probably increased. I still believe that Mr. Putin understands how impactful this would be for him, for Russia, and for others. They're already a pariah state, but they might lose some of their closest allies if they take this next drastic step. So I believe it's probable, but I am hopeful that Mr. Putin understands that the cost to him would be incredible and therefore will make a much more prudent decision.
Could I have a number, sir? Are you closer to 5 or closer to 20?
I'm over half glass full on this. I think that he will probably back himself into this corner.
General Philip Breedlove, retired general, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe from 2013 through 16, taking part virtually in an event on Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear threats, hosted today by the Atlantic Council. In Iran, the anti-government protests and the violent suppression of them continues. The Guardian has this: Iranian security forces have opened fire on protesters in Zahedan a month after a massacre that killed scores of people in the restive southern eastern city. Crowds were also fired on in Mahabad, another city with a long history of resistance against the regime, in renewed deadly violence at the end of the 6th week of unrest sparked by the death in police custody of Mahsa Amini on September 16th. Article continues: the scale of the violence is disputed by official news agencies who blame rioters for the unrest. The president of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Federico Villegas, interviewed today at another Atlantic Council event, and one question from the moderator, Gisu Nia, was about how the United Nations Council might help the protesters in Iran and what obstacles may stand in the way.
How does the Human Rights Council amplify or support those in the country that are looking for a change with their human rights situation, especially when the state that you or the body would be engaging with doesn't let rapporteurs into the country, isn't necessarily interested in constructive engagement? You know, what is a way to support? I think that's what's being asked in these many questions that we've received on this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a very important question. Iran is a very important country. It's a sophisticated millenary culture, and it has the attention of the world. So it's fine to have a lot of questions about Iran. No problem about that. First of all, the Council fosters a space for dialogue and debate for societies to decide their path in improving human rights. But that means that we do not have a recipe. Each society has its own social and institutional tissue that makes them evolve. So I think that the constructive engagement, I'm sure you know, but constructive engagement is a concept that you have many people in Washington that can tell you a lot about how to implement constructive engagement, because they were the inventors of the concept in the 80s, like Ambassador Chester Crocker, for example, that I recently had a very interesting conversation on this. Constructive engagement means even if you don't like, even if you know that a country might not make a change, but you have society demanding a debate, you have an engagement to foster that debate. So I think that the Council can help Iranian society to find a path of evolution if they feel that they need that debate. If that includes certain changes, it will depend on each country. We cannot, from the outside, decide how countries change their way to organize politically, socially, and economically. That was precisely what happened in the Cold War. We had decades where one side said to the other how you should organize politically, socially, and economically. So that is from the past. Now we have to respect the rhythm, the learnings of each society, and the Iranian society, for what we are witnessing, will be continuing this type of debate. Whether this happens one thing or another, when societies evolve, all of our societies evolved.
Federico Villegas is United Nations Human Rights Council president, part of the conversation today at the Atlantic Council. The moderator was Atlantic Council Strategic Litigation Project Director Gisu Nia. The U.S. today also sanctioning an Iranian entity responsible for issuing a bounty on Salman Rushdie in response to the attack on the author in August. Both the State Department and the Department of the Treasury issuing statements announcing that the Group 15 Khordad Foundation is a specially designated global terrorist. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more of Washington's top stories sent to your inbox every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.